positive developments coming out of Texas. The governor of that state has endorsed the push to make the entire state of Texas a Second Amendment sanctuary. This is something that is not at all unexpected to me. This is something that I've been talking about even up until this week. I thought Texas would be, the first mover on this sort of thing. I think that gun control is the number one wedge issue in America, and that we have long since passed the point to where there can be any kind of compromise or agreement on this issue. It's very simple. The left half of this country wants to take away guns from private citizens, and the right half doesn't want to give any of it up. And that's a good thing, because when you get compromise, you lose some of your rights, but not all of them. I think it's much better if everyone is just honest about what they want, and they don't give in. Now, I'd prefer if 100% of people in this country agreed, on the right to bear arms, but I'll take at least half, as long as, that half is really solid on the issue. And so what is what's the importance of declaring your jurisdiction a Second Amendment sanctuary? Well, what that means is essentially that you're endorsing nullification. It is an act of nullification. It is a pledge to nullify any federal gun laws that are unconstitutional. And that doesn't mean enforcing the law while you're trying to sue the federal government to get it declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, which may or may not declare it unconstitutional, because, of course, as many people on the right have learned, the U.S. Supreme Court is not the most reliable institution. And so, this is sort of a dividend of Trump's legal fight. Even though he lost it, I thought that it was very constructive. It informed a lot of people in this country that they cannot rely on the courts. Even when they think that the Constitution is on their side, the Supreme Court is not necessarily going to rule in their favor. And so they need to act outside of the courts. And so that means pushing lower levels of government not to comply with federal mandates. This is something that's also not surprising in the aftermath of Allen West's statement that he issued as, the chairman of the Texas Republican Party after the Supreme Court struck down their case, pertaining to the election. Allen West said, hey, I guess it's clear the Supreme Court doesn't believe in the Constitution anymore. Perhaps Texas and other states should form a new union of states that does recognize the Constitution. And so, and enforce the Bill of Rights and obviously all of that. And so being a Second Amendment sanctuary is a part of that, saying, hey, even if the federal government decides to violate the Constitution, we will not help them do it. Even if Joe Biden says, we're going to take away the evil assault weapons, that will not happen to the people of Texas. And there will be other Republican states that are going to very quickly join onto this. Once an entire state does this, you're going to see others jumping on the bandwagon. And so this will be sort of an implicit interstate compact. You'll have an entire block of Second Amendment sanctuary states who are already ahead of time, and I hope that they get this done as soon as possible before there's any real federal gun legislation. I want this to be on paper and on the record that these states are not going to go along with it, so that the fight is a little easier if it actually comes to that. And I don't mean like a literal fight, I mean like a political fight. Because this also puts pressure on the feds not to pass any new gun laws. Because if you have a block of states, let's say Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, South Dakota, Wyoming, all the real, common red states. Perhaps this wouldn't happen in Louisiana right now since they have a Democratic governor, although he just passed basically an abortion ban. So, maybe it's possible that he would sign on to something like that. It's not going to happen in North Carolina right now with their Democrat governor. But in addition to all these states, what you'll have is a bunch of states doing it statewide. And then you'll have all these counties which have already been doing it for the last couple of years. This got the most amount of attention in Virginia when the state of Virginia tried to pass an assault weapons ban. The red counties, the sheriffs, they all said, we're not going to enforce that. That bill's going nowhere. It's unconstitutional. I swore an oath to the Constitution. I'm not going to break it. And so it's much easier to make the case that your jurisdiction should be a Second Amendment sanctuary before there's a big overreaching federal gun law that's passed than after. You don't want to try and undo a law. You want to try and stop it before it even gains traction. So make sure that that law is totally illegitimate before it goes into effect. Because if there is a big, a large swath of this country is a so-called Second Amendment sanctuary, well then the Democrats at the federal level will have to know that when they pass that law, it's only going to affect a subset of the entire United States. And of course, if they push to try and enforce it, if they say, oh no, you can't nullify federal laws, and they go try and start breaking things up, kind of like it was considered that they might do in Colorado with the marijuana stuff, because of course Colorado is not enforcing the federal ban on marijuana. There, people are smoking marijuana. It's still illegal at the federal level. And the reality is that the feds just don't have the resources to enforce these laws without cooperation from state and local governments. Not even in the case of Colorado would it have been feasible for the feds on their own to enforce a ban on marijuana. And marijuana is not nearly as widespread as the ownership of certain guns, which would be targeted under any sort of new gun laws. So needless to say, without state and local cooperation, those gun laws would not go forward. And so this, to me, is the real big flashpoint that could trigger a final split, a hard split of the Union. If tensions really heat up over this, that's obviously where this would lead to. Your Second Amendment sanctuaries would simply say, nope, we're pulling out of the federal government. But, nullification doesn't have to lead to that. What it could lead to is just the normalization of the nullification of federal laws. And that would be a very positive thing. I mean, that wouldn't need to, on paper, break up the Union. The Constitution would technically still exist. The American flag would still be flying. But our government would substantially change in that states and local governments could simply decide to govern themselves as they see fit. Once that idea of total federal supremacy, unquestionable federal supremacy, is broken, we would have an opportunity to really tone down the political tension in this country, because the federal government, if they are deprived of that power, they become less important. And then, presidential elections and congressional elections won't matter so much as state elections. It'll be more about, okay, well, what can you get your state legislature to pass? What sorts of, federal laws can we nullify today? Can we legalize, recreational marijuana in the states that don't have that yet? Can we legalize or decriminalize maybe harder drugs like heroin, so that you have a chance to try and treat it more as a medical problem rather than a criminal problem? And so there is a potential that instead of leading to the end of the American Union, this just leads to a new, much more peaceful age for it, one which is much more akin to what the founding fathers had in mind, where actual political power rests in the hands of the states and the state governments, and where the federal government is de-emphasized. That scenario is what will occur if, in response to the Second Amendment sanctuary movement, we see sort of a détente between the states and the federal government, to where the federal government just sort of gives up. But if the feds push and push with all their might, which, considering the recent political climate, that seems like what they would do, well, then they're just going to have to push states to leave. sort of a kind of like a hard Brexit scenario where they left without a deal, you'd have a hard Texit. And so if a split like that's going to occur, it's over the Second Amendment. So I think right now, now that Texas is doing this, the clock is ticking. There should be a rush in any state where this is possible to try and pass a similar Second Amendment sanctuary law. I mean, places like even, Ohio and Iowa these days, they should be able to get that done. I believe Iowa doesn't even have a Second Amendment mirror in their state constitution, which is problematic. Perhaps they should amend their constitution and add the right to bear arms. So I guess that's about all I have to say for today. If you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.